Thanks for inviting me today. I do know a few people in the room, so it's really lovely to see you all again, even though it's in my different role. So what we thought we'd do today was give you all an overview of the highly specialised technology programme at NICE. We have Professor Ron Akehurst doing a session around how the committee works and how they undertake some of their decision making, but I'm going to give you a flavour of how the committee works. So just in terms of background, some of you may be aware that previously the highly specialised services were commissioned by the National Specialised Commissioning Team, and they were responsible for undertaking the evaluation of new technologies for rare diseases. And when the NHS was restructured in 2013, NICE took over that responsibility to observe independence, robustness and transparent processes in that assessment process. So they wanted to kind of make sure that evaluations were undertaken objectively, and that's why NICE took over that role. So what's the remit of the HST committee? Well, the remit is really to evaluate the benefits and cost of a technology within the marketing authorisation of a technology for the treatment of a particular condition. So it is generally for one condition and the new technology that's been going out. That's what the remit is of the committee, and it is for national commissioning in NHS England. Now, absolutely recognise, and some of you may know, that some of the decisions that are made at NICE are looked on favourably around the world. Europe often looks to us and around the world. So whilst we do make the decisions that are based for commissioning in NHS England, a lot of the world is looking at what is NICE doing and what are the results of that. I'm not going to go through this slide in too much detail. Flora, are we sharing the slides with everybody? So it's just to give you a flavour of the stages that we need to go through when we are selecting topics for evaluation. We get topics selected from various sources, mostly from a place called the National Horizon Scanning Centre, who are responsible for identifying new innovations and technologies that are potentially coming to market. And then we go through a process with the Department of Health and the NICE Secretariat to try and assess the viability of taking those projects and those processes forward. So we've got a level of criteria that are applied around where and how many patients might be affected by the condition. Is it clinically distinct? Is it something that's very distinct in terms of its clinical manifestations? So all of those criteria are on our NICE website, so you can actually find them there. But they go through different decision points, and we get to a point where we think, yes, Highly Specialised Technology Appraisal Committee should evaluate the product, and then it's referred to NICE formally by the Minister to look at. So what's the criteria that we look at? We look at the nature of the condition and its impact on the condition. So we're expecting to understand whether the new technology that's being put forward is actually going to have an impact. As Eli said, it's no good having an innovation if it's not changing things for patients. We try and understand the costs to the NHS for delivering that innovation and the personal social services. There's a recognition, specifically in rare diseases, that there is a much wider impact on the social services budget around that, and so we need to consider that. We'd like to obviously understand and make best use of the resource that's being used in the NHS. The value for money becomes a really important criteria. And the impact of the technology beyond the direct health benefits. So the technology might be really good at changing something clinically, but we understand and recognise that actually it will impact a wider element of patients' care. It will impact on carer responsibilities if things are changed. It might impact on quality of life. So, for example, children are able to go to school if that technology works, and therefore parents' responsibilities are slightly different. And so we want to understand how that impact is felt. And we also need to understand the impact of the technology on delivering the specialised service. So some of you may be aware that the NHS has got what's called the manual, and it talks about all the specialised services and highly specialised services that are currently commissioned by NHS England. And in some situations, new technologies are coming forward where there are no services or mechanisms in which those technologies can actually be delivered to patients. So we like to take that into consideration. Are there services already out there? Is the infrastructure already in place? Are the specialists out there, and have they got the appropriate expertise to support these patients? So that's a real consideration that we need to take into account. Because of course if it's not there, the NHS are going to have to find resource additional above that to be able to find it. So the challenges around evaluating drugs for rare conditions are lots, and I'm sure you can add to this list today. The orphan drugs do not usually prove to be cost effective based on the usual technology appraisal methods that NICE uses for non-highly specialised technologies. So we need to have come up with different evaluation criteria. In terms of how we see it, rarity means that the weight of evidence isn't the same as for conventional diseases. So we know that for rare diseases it's a small heterogeneous population. We're looking at the fact that because there's a small population, there'll be very small and contained and very short trials that show effectiveness. There's limited scientific understanding because we don't understand the long-term outcomes for some of these patients. We just haven't got the data to understand what those things are and how that manifests itself in terms of long-term. In some situations, you know, for some conditions, patients have died so early in history that we haven't got enough data to know that if this technology is going to change things, and does that mean they will live a longer life? We don't know. And there's a lack of consensus on the data and the comparators. How do you do a comparison in a really small proportion of patients? Do you give the technology to half and not give it to the other half? You're sometimes looking at, you know, in Austrians, I know, you know, you're looking at sort of 50 or 60 patients. How do you undertake a trial in that and do a comparison? Who do you compare against and how do you compare it? The other thing around decision making is that we don't necessarily apply the strict cost effectiveness criteria. So the ISAs and the QALY things that Eli referred to earlier, we really like to look at societal value. What is this technology going to deliver in terms of the wider societal context? We try and quantify as much as we can and qualify that with the patient testimonies, the seriousness of the condition. You know, what is the impact? How are patients managing themselves? And how are the carers and family members having to support that? Are there available alternative treatment options? In most scenarios, there aren't any, and clinicians and patients and families are just having to learn to live with these conditions. So in terms of where we look, there are no other alternatives in which us to undertake a comparison with. What's the cost to the patient if the drug isn't reimbursed? If we were to say that this technology is not a good use of NHS money, what actually would be the cost to the patient? What would happen to those patients as a result? And technical versus allocated for efficiency. How can we ensure that we are efficiently managing the resources in the NHS? So as Eli very eloquently demonstrated with the bed, you know, if we do this, something somewhere else is going to have to fall off the agenda. And I'm sure you all are completely aware of the strain on the NHS budget as it currently stands, and all of the challenges and all of the things that are in the public domain around it, so I don't need to rehearse that with you. So it's a constant challenge for the committee around what they do with these drugs. Over to you in terms of how we want you to be involved. How can you be involved in these highly specialised technology evaluations, and what can you do to contribute? We're really keen, and we try really hard with Heidi and Chloe and various others to identify the appropriate patient organisations and patients to engage in our scoping exercise. So the scoping exercise, when we get a technology for taking into the evaluation, we're trying to understand what question is it that we're trying to answer. So we try to define the population around the rare conditions that we're wanting to look at. We try and understand the different challenges that patients and carers have to deal with and try and extract that in the scoping discussions. And then in stage 2, we look at when the technology comes to the evaluation committee, we look at what can we do to get input from you when we're developing guidance and so on. We also ask you to be involved in the evaluation, but I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. So patient organisations can comment in writing on the scopes if they want to. They can sometimes be invited to the meetings and have an opportunity to participate in those discussions, and we will often look to ask you as patient organisations if you agree with what the clinicians are saying. Do you agree with what the pharmaceutical companies are saying? Because we want to be sure that we're getting the right question being asked of our committee. In terms of the actual committee, we asked patient experts to provide statements so that the committee consider those key criteria that I talked about earlier. So we're wanting to know about the nature of the condition, we're wanting to understand how carers and family members are affected by having a patient with this condition in their meeting. We often get patients attending the meetings as individuals to present their case and present the case on behalf of that patient group. We do like patients and organisations to have a broader understanding of that patient population and the condition relevant to that condition. But also, we understand that actually it's the personal experience that really tells the story. It brings that condition to life for the committee, and I'm sure Ron will echo some of that when he talks about his role as committee. In terms of how NICE supports patients, experts to participate, Heidi and Chloe's team work really hard to ensure that patient organisations are included in the scoping and guidance publications and in the committee. We make sure we're supporting patient experts and patient organisations from the beginning of the scoping exercise, during the meeting, after the committee meeting, and we're wanting to make sure that you've understood the process, you're able to ask questions, and you're able to participate fully. We make sure that we try and provide patient support materials where we can, and we liaise with patient groups to include their version of the guidance is put out, so that there's a kind of lay version that we can support them with. But I can tell you for sure it's something that we're quite passionate about in NICE, especially in the HST committee, to make sure that patients do really get an opportunity to participate fully as fully fledged equal partners within the evaluation process. So eculizumab was our first evaluation, and I would be lying if I didn't say that it wasn't the most challenging one. Because it was the first one, we had no idea how it was going to pan out. But I was pleased to say that because the technology demonstrated an absolute life-changing scenario for those patients, it was passed through as a positive evaluation for the committee. But I cannot stress enough how important it was that the patients that participated in that evaluation brought that situation to life for committee. They really were helpful in helping committee understand how life-changing this drug would be for them, and that's the reason that it was agreed. But it is £10 million, it is a huge amount of money, and the drug that was put forward did demonstrate a massive step change in the way those patients would be looked after. So for committee to come to that decision, they really had to have felt that it was something completely different and had never been done before, and it would really change patients' lives. And I know you're hearing from Len later on, so I'm sure he'll be able to tell you much better. So the key considerations in that scenario were it was innovative, but it was an absolute step change. It was something that would change patients' lives dramatically. There were some limitations and uncertainties in the evidence base, but from what we could see, it was really effective and it really had these substantial quality gains. It was extremely high cost for patients, and that was one of the things that caused a lot of discussion around whether we should approve it or not. And it had a substantial impact on the NHS budget as a whole, but because it was so revolutionary, I suppose is a good way of putting it, the committee decided that it would take it forward. So in terms of the recommendation, we agreed to fund eculizumab for the treatment of AHUS. It had to have certain things in place. So it had to be delivered through expert centres. So I talked earlier about the fact that highly specialised services are delivered with good infrastructure, with specialised clinicians and support services for those conditions. It had to have a national protocol for prescribing with starting and stopping criteria. So clinicians and patient groups, I'm hoping, had some opportunity to contribute to what kind of criteria you would start a patient on and when you would stop. We also asked for a further research programme with robust methods to evaluate when further stopping criteria could be put forward, only because we were mindful of the fact that there are budget impacts that we need to consider in the NHS. That is it for me. So the only other thing I wanted to quickly flag, and some of you may be aware that we've recently evaluated a drug for MPS 4, which is Vimzin or Elasulfase, whichever kind of term you remember. But that one again was a positive evaluation, but it was agreed within a managed access type scenario. So it's a 5-year term of funding where the company and the patient groups have agreed to collect further data to try and extract which patient group out of those patients with MPS 4 would be most eligible and have the most effective benefits. But it's a different way of getting access. So we're not going to fund it forever, we're going to try and get some more data, but it means that we're giving patients access.
Thank you very much.